Hi, it's Josh, and the first thing I would like to do is to welcome aboard the new subscribers that have come along thanks to a very kind shout out from Joel Eddy of Drive-Thru Games. If you appreciate Joel Eddy not just for his excellent content, but for the person that he is and the integrity of his character, then you and I are going to get along fabulously, so I'm very happy to have you aboard. Now, in less happy news, which I've had a little too much of in recent weeks, if my normally ghastly hue was a little worse than normal. My word, to look a little rough. Okay, all right. It's because I've been fighting with gastroenteritis for the past few days. Now, I worked for 16 years as a paramedic, and the one and only time that I was a patient in the back of the ambulance, which is just never a position you want to be in as a paramedic. You don't want to be that paramedic who's calling an ambulance to take yourself to the hospital. But the one time it did happen was a few years back. The last time I had gastroenteritis, I had honestly about 40 bouts of diarrhea in a 4-hour period, and I was starting to lose consciousness from lack of fluids or possibly lack of electrolytes, and I had to be taken to the hospital on that occasion. This time around, due to a pesky little pandemic that is going around, I decided I was going to stay out of the hospital and just suffer through it in my bed at home. But my word, did I ever need some IV meds and fluids. So I somehow managed to survive sticking it out at home here, and one of the reasons I'm bringing you today's top 10, my top 10 favorite YouTube channels, is because a while back my friend Richard asked me what my favorite YouTube channels were, and I'm just so terrible with names I couldn't really remember any of them. But it's because all of us are, to a certain extent, stuck at home on our own, hopefully self-isolating to not spread this illness around. And so I wanted to bring you a couple of videos, one with my top 10 YouTube channels, and at some point in the not too distant future, my top 10 podcasts, because these are things that you can do to keep entertained at home and to help not go too crazy as time passes. So let's dive into the top 10 list. Okay, right off the bat, I'll tell you that I cheated a little bit to squeeze in some extras here. What I ended up doing was creating my top 10 favorite categories of YouTube channels, and in so doing, I'm going to get to mention, in fact, 20 different YouTube channels rather than 10 throughout the course of this video. The top 3 I've kept on their own, but the rest of these categories have 2 to 3 YouTube channels per category. Before I dive into the top 10, I'm going to start with an honorable mention, and this channel is called Be Action Now TV. This is done by one of my nieces, which is why I really wanted to recommend it, and she generally covers topics of an environmental nature. So I think those of us who are interested in science are well aware of the increasing environmental catastrophe that we find ourselves heading into, but with persons such as this Be Action Now TV host, and other young people like Greta Thunberg, if we could leave the world in hands like these young people, then we would have nothing to worry about. Unfortunately, we don't, but in the meantime, it's really well worth your while to educate yourself, I think, and to learn about such important issues. So starting in with number 10, I have called my Great Filmmakers category. Now this is a category of a few different people who are incredible filmmakers, but they are using that skill in a YouTube setting rather than in a movie making setting specifically. And the first person I'm going to mention here is Casey Neistat, who's sort of one of the original super talented video makers on YouTube. He spends well over a year, I believe, doing a daily video blog, and somehow with each individual video blog he made, he managed to create a very interesting little story arc of his day. And it's just amazing that he managed to keep that up and edit each of these masterpieces on a daily basis for such a long period of time. Now he does a mix of his sort of personal life and work life and just various things of interest. But as a filmmaker, his talents are just undeniable. The next one I'm going to mention actually came to New York City to work with Casey Neistat for a while, and his name is Dan Mace. He worked for some time as a pretty successful maker of commercials, and I know he's done a lot of work in that sort of filmmaking over the years. And he's another one who brings just a huge amount of talent to the art form of video making. And then the final person in this category is Austin McConnell. He hasn't had quite as much commercial success, I don't think, as the two previous ones that I mentioned. In fact, he has had a lot of success with talking about his failures as a filmmaker in his YouTube channel, but he certainly brings his own perspective to each of the videos he makes and really bears himself for the sake of the viewers, which is something that allows us as viewers to get right into his thoughts and his feelings about what he's making. Moving along then to the number 9 category, which I'm calling the People on the Street category. I have 2 for this one. The first one here is Soraia Marin, and she basically just talks to people on the street and asks them fairly deep personal questions, and then compiles each individual question into a video. And it's really very fascinating to hear people talk about deep things kind of on the spot in a sort of one-on-one with a stranger setting, and it's inspired me to maybe try something similar if we ever get back to a point where we can interact with other humans again. Because I'm somebody who hates small talk and just wants to go deep with people right away and just learn about what makes them tick and what's important to them. So that is something that I've enjoyed watching. Now, the other person in this category is a very much the opposite approach. It's a very humorous approach, and that is Billy on the Street TV. I will say that I normally hate loud, shouty types of people, but somehow Billy is the only person I've ever seen who can make shouting funny. And my word, am I ever cracking myself up when I'm watching his videos of just approaching random people on the street and asking them the silliest questions. He has such a quick wit and manages to bring out just some of the funniest parts of people. It helps, I think, that he lives in New York City, and maybe they're not quite as fazed by having such a person approach them in the street, but it is certainly good for a lot of laughs. Getting into category number 8 now, I'm going to call the Fascinating Facts category. The first person we have here is Joe Scott, and it's just exactly what it sounds. He takes some kind of random fact and deep dives into it for a good 15 or 20 minutes, and I end up learning something just truly fascinating and interesting with each and every one of his videos. In fact, he recently did a really interesting and well done video about the whole COVID-19 pandemic, which I learned some new things from and found to be very educational overall. In a similar manner, the other channel, Half as Interesting, takes these random snippets of information and packages them up into a very interesting and informative viewing experience. So yeah, if you're just interested in learning random stuff, which I'm always endlessly curious about myself, check out Half as Interesting and Joe Scott. Now, the number 7 category I call the world's greatest and most well-researched interviewers. So we have 2 people here. First, we have First We Feast, which features Sean on the show Hot Ones. He interviews celebrities while they eat increasingly agonizing hot wings. And with both of these channels, I'm so not into celebrity culture or celebrities in general, and yet the interviewers themselves are what make it for me. Just the deep dives they take into their guests' lives and the interesting questions they ask and the things they pull out of them are really what draws me to First We Feast. And my second one in the category, if there is one interviewer in the world who's even better than Sean on Hot Ones, then it is Nardwuar the Human Serviette on his channel, Nardwuar Serviette. Now, he mostly interviews musicians, and at first it was largely sort of underground scene in the punk scene type of musicians that he was interviewing, but somehow he managed to snag a couple of big name hip-hop figures. In particular, Snoop Dogg he managed to interview, and Snoop Dogg was so impressed with him that he started putting his name out to other hip-hop people, and so now I think the vast majority of the interviews he does are within the hip-hop scene. He also branches out occasionally to politicians or to other famous personalities, but there's something about Nardwuar and his ability to dig up the most random weird facts that always shocks the interviewees. The common refrain is, "How did you know that?" To which he always replies, "You're so-and-so, we have to know, of course." Now, it does seem that half his questions are more about shocking the person he's interviewing, that he actually knows that deeply about them, than about asking interesting questions per se, but it still makes it fun to watch as the viewer. Category 6 now is my board games category, and I have to squeeze 3 of them into this one. So I mentioned Joel Eddy earlier, and the first one I will mention is Drive-Thru Games. Joel takes a very thoughtful and intelligent approach to game reviews. And in recent years, he's also been branching out into the whole world of miniatures gaming and minis painting and everything that goes along with that. So not only do I get to watch him talk about board games, but I get to watch him teach me things about painting technique and that sort of thing too. I mentioned Joel's character earlier, and he just seems like such a man of integrity that I admire him for who he is and what he does. Now, on the very opposite end of the serious to silly approach, we have the brothers Murph, who really bring the fun into board gaming, which should be the #1 thing when it comes to gaming, in my opinion. And the two brothers just really make for a delightful viewing, a lot of laugh out loud moments. They bring a ton of energy, a ton of passion, a lot of silliness, and a lot of humor to this hobby of board gaming, which make them a delight to spend time with on YouTube. And then the third channel really does a wonderful job of combining both those things. That is Shut Up and Sit Down, who bring both amazing British humor and really thoughtful social commentary even to the games that they review. So with Shut Up and Sit Down, we really get the best of all worlds. We get to be entertained, we get to laugh out loud, but we also get to think very seriously and deeply at times about the games that are being discussed and the themes that surround them. Here at the halfway point of this top 10 countdown, I want to really briefly mention the fact that I have a Patreon account that's linked in the description below this video. I'd really appreciate it if you take a minute to check it out and even consider supporting me on Patreon. Or even if you're able to consider a one-time donation, I also have my PayPal linked below. So these are things that would just support me and the hours of effort I put into making my videos, and would be appreciated a lot. If that's not something you can consider right now, I'm always happy to bring my content for free to people who want to watch it for free. Either way, thank you, and we'll get back to the top 10. Category number 5, I am going to call the Science and Nature channels, and the first one I'm going to mention is Pecos Hank. Now, this person is primarily a storm chaser. He does a lot of tornado chasing, so the vast majority of his videos seem to be around this storm chasing theme. However, he does branch out occasionally to a bit of ocean stuff, just kind of snorkeling and diving and that sort of thing, which really combines two of the most wondrous aspects of this planet for me: the big, huge, scary storms and just the incredible world that lies below the surface of the ocean. But what really sets him apart from other storm chasers and tornado channels is his filmmaking ability. Just the shots he gets, the videos he produces are just such high quality and top notch. And just he himself as being kind of a calm individual, not getting kind of caught up in the whole hype of what he's doing, but just appreciating really the beauty and majesty of these powerful things that he's experiencing. The other person I'm going to mention is Anton Petrov, and he covers astrophysics, but he does it in a very approachable manner, and it's very much the opposite of Pecos Hank, who's kind of out there catching all this really dynamic imagery, whereas Anton Petrov is just kind of sitting in his office in front of his microphone with a little bit of computer graphics in the background, just talking about really fascinating topics related to astrophysics and just things that blow my mind constantly. He also has an incredibly high output of videos. I don't know where he finds the time, but there's no shortage of really interesting things to watch on Anton Petrov's channel. Next, we're going to dive into the history category, and for this one we have perhaps the longest name on the list, and that is The History Guy, History Deserves to Be Remembered. And this is just a gentleman who is obviously a historian, and he brings such interesting little tidbits to the table where he'll take a little kind of not necessarily well-known piece of a larger piece of history and just zoom in and focus on something that's very fascinating and perhaps gives more perspective on the larger picture of the history that it inhabits. The other one, which again is an opposite type of situation, is Oversimplified, who takes a grand, huge topic and just condenses it into a little 20 or 30 minute video with the most incredible animations. It's amazing how we can take a topic like the American Civil War and crunch it down into 2 little half-hour videos and just cover so many interesting facts and then inject so many little pieces of laugh-out-loud humor in the middle of it too. It's really quite an amazing production that Oversimplified does. So getting into the top 3 now, like I said, I've kept these individually so they don't have to share the prestigious top 3 categories. And coming in at number 3 is a channel called Knowing Better. And this is an individual who does socio-political deep dives, where he'll look at a particular topic and create a good 20 to 30 minute video on that particular topic and really get into the history and all the different circumstances surrounding the topic that he's talking about. He's a very thoughtful person, and it's been interesting to see how, as he himself really studies a lot about these various topics, has changed as a person over time, and even some of his opinions have shifted as he has educated himself, as hopefully would happen to most educated people as they learn more things about the world. But for a very thoughtful, well-researched approach to the world, check out Knowing Better. Number 2 is a category I call The Life I Wish I Was Living, and this channel is Sailing La Vagabond. It's kind of a travel video blog, except these people are living a life where they pretty much permanently reside on a sailboat, and they sail literally all over the world, depending on times of year and seasons and what's going on at the time, and we just get to follow their lives as they live on a sailboat. But the imagery they capture is just so stunning. First of all, the couple that are filming it are the most impossibly good-looking couple you've ever seen, and they just captured the most impossibly beautiful scenery. The ocean scenery in particular is just absolutely amazing. And they have a true talent, again, for the storytelling. Although they do upload frequently, they still manage with each video to put together a really compelling narrative and combine that with the most stunning visual imagery you could ever imagine. Now, the best thing I can say about this channel is, if you caught my last personal update, you'll know just how shattered my life has been in recent weeks. And not that long ago, I sat down to watch some of their channel, and I watched 2 or 3 of their videos. Maybe an hour and a half later, I shut off their videos, sat back, and it was as if I had totally forgotten the fact that my life was burning down around me. And it wasn't until I shut off the video where it all came flooding back to me again. But for that hour and a half in the meantime, I was taken completely out of it to something else, which made coming back to it that much harder. But at least I can say that I was transported to this most amazingly beautiful place for that period of time and was able to get out of my own little hole. It's just really mind-blowing stuff. But number 1 is a category that I'll call I guess what I'll call it is Existential Science. The channel is called Exurb1A, and it's such an interesting, fascinating look at existentialism in kind of this absurdist animation format that is completely impossible to try to describe to you. It's really the type of thing that you got to see to understand it. So definitely go to this YouTube channel, maybe click on the most popular videos and just start watching them. Again, this combination of humor and intelligence and knowledge come together in the most beautiful way to make it my number 1 choice for YouTube channels. So there are 20 YouTube channels that I would recommend. There's a ton more, especially within the science and history categories, that I would love to mention. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know, and maybe I'll make an 11 through 20 YouTube video categories at some point. But meanwhile, I would love for you to tell me what YouTube channels I should be checking out. Please do let me know in the comments below. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you could consider doing one of the following things, I would appreciate it. Give me a thumb up, subscribe to my channel. If you've already subscribed, hit that notification bell, or share the link to the video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Hi, it's Josh. Not only is... And the honorable mention now... And he's another one who brings just a super... squeaky chair. And packages them up into a very entertaining and fun to watch. That's kind of the same thing. But eventually he started to get... I just wanted to briefly mention the fact that I have a Patreon. and maybe helps to tell the larger picture, of the history that it is, and perhaps